In this video, you will learn how to speed up the load times of your Angular application and how to keep its initial bundle size as small as possible. Picture this typical Angular architecture. At the very root of your application, you have the app module. Then you split parts of your website into a home, an about, and a portfolio section. You decide that your portfolio section should be wrapped inside its own feature module that you even lazy load. But what's up with the about section? It is still eagerly loaded. You don't want to wrap it inside another feature module for lazy loading because it's only one component and that process is too tedious. On the other hand, the feature module contains lots of components, especially a really heavy one that maybe loads even more components, lots of directives, dependencies, CSS, and much more. However, initially it is not even visible to the user because he first needs to click on a button to display its contents. You might wrap that heavy component inside an ngIf, but that only keeps it from getting rendered to the DOM. The code is still eagerly loaded. Let's take on these two performance problems. Here in the routing module, you can see all configured routes, including the about section. If we want to lazy load that section, even though it's just a single component, we actually don't need to wrap it inside another routing module. Instead, we can make it standalone, like so. You can mark components, directives, and pipes as standalone. This means they are no longer part of any ng module and they handle their dependencies on their own. In fact, if you have Angular 17 or higher installed, every new application is standalone per default. For existing applications like this portfolio website, fear not, you can mix standalone components and ng modules effortlessly. For this, we only need to go to our app module and remove the about component from the declarations array. Instead, we need to import it just like we would an ng module. Now we can harness the true power of standalone components, a simplified approach to lazy loading. In our app routing module, we only need to use load component and provide a function that points to our about component. Load component is only possible for standalone components. Our portfolio feature module down here must still use load children and point to a module. Let's go to the network tab in the Chrome developer tools. If we click on about, we see a chunk appear. This means everything is wired up properly and the standalone component is being lazy loaded. But what about the heavy component inside our portfolio feature module? It is not accessible through a route and only visible to the user after he clicks on the button. Thus, there's no need for it to get eagerly loaded. Let's lazy load it using Angular's deferrable views. I'll explain these defer blocks in a moment. However, they only work with standalone components. Let's transform our heavy component into one first. Inside the heavy component, we set the standalone property to true. Then we go to the portfolio feature module, remove it from the declarations array and add it to the imports array. However, that's not all. Heavy component gets referenced by the portfolio component, so we need to turn this one into a standalone component as well. We perform the same two familiar steps and then we need to import the heavy component into the portfolio component. Keep in mind, this is a standalone component, so it needs to handle all dependencies by itself. And since it uses the heavy component selector in the HTML, we need to tell Angular where to find it. In general, such a @defer block consists of 4 parts. First, the actual @defer part, where you wrap a component that you want to lazy load. Then you can add an @placeholder to display content that should get displayed until the defer block is triggered. The @loading block displays content during the actual loading of deferred dependencies. For example, this could be a loading spinner. Lastly, @error shows some HTML markup when the deferred loading fails. @placeholder, @loading, and @error are all optional. For the best user experience, you should provide an @placeholder block. And keep in mind that all content in these 3 parts is still eagerly loaded. Everything inside the @defer block is lazy loaded. In order to start lazy loading the defer block, You can either provide a condition or use one or a combination of several possible triggers. The default trigger is onIdle, which triggers the deferred loading once the browser has reached an idle state. You can also use onViewport, which loads the component once its content enters the viewport, or onInteraction, which loads the component once a user interacts with the content through a click event. Let's wrap our heavy component in such a defer block. We move the button down into the add placeholder block and provide the clicked condition as trigger. By the way, if you are not familiar with this new control flow syntax, I have a whole video dedicated to it. I will provide a link in the description for you to check it out. Anyway, we can remove the if condition. Let's see the lazy loading in action. First, I click on Portfolio. In the Network tab, nothing unexpected happens because that feature module already gets lazy loaded. Then I click on the button, which will replace the add placeholder with the contents of the heavy component. Look, another chunk appears, indicating that our heavy component also gets lazy loaded. Isn't that cool? What do you think of these two performance enhancing features? Are you as excited about lazy loaded standalone components and deferrable views as I am? Or do you see any weaknesses or potential obstacles? Tell me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.